This is Robert Moyer, and this is my persuasive speech, and this is my audience. Okay. Weed, dope, pot. Do these terms immediately create judgment in your mind? They're drugs, right? They describe an illegal substance. They must be bad words. But what if I told you the criminalization of marijuana is based completely on a propaganda campaign, or that medicinal marijuana is not a recent concept? Are you aware of the social and economic benefits it has at the local, state, and federal levels? Let's find out how legitimate the negative stigma attached to marijuana really is, as I explain why it should be legalized on the federal level. I have researched the history and read extensively about the benefits of marijuana. Legalized marijuana creates jobs, stimulates local and federal economies, provides funding for public programs, and defunds cartels and black markets, which would have a positive impact on our country. First, I will touch on the history and criminalization of marijuana, and finally, I will provide some beneficial facts about marijuana. Let's start with a little history. Marijuana in the United States is older than the United States itself. The Complicated History of Cannabis in the U.S., published by History.com, states that marijuana was imported by settlers as early as the 1600s. They grew hemp like any other cash crop, and the production of hemp was highly encouraged by the government for its uses in clothing, rope, and paper. The article History of Marijuana, written for Recovery.org, states that as early as the 1700s and 1800s, marijuana was being studied for its medicinal benefits. Even George Washington questioned its potential medical uses in 1765. And by 1800, marijuana became a mainstream medicine used to treat opioid withdrawal, pain, and to aid in appetite stimulation and relief from nausea. Now that we have covered why hemp was imported and important to the United States, let's move on to the men who created the fear campaign which led to the criminalization of marijuana. During the 1900s, William Randolph Hearst and Henry Anslinger fronted a propaganda campaign to discredit the hemp industry and outlaw marijuana. The article, How Marijuana Became Illegal, states William Randolph Hearst was a newspaper mogul and owner of a major logging company, which he used to produce tree pulp paper, a major rival to the hemp paper industry. Through his newspapers, he published fabricated stories which described marijuana as an evil drug that led to murder, rape, and insanity. This propaganda was used specifically to instill fear and hinder the use of hemp in production. Meet the man responsible for marijuana prohibition, published through massroots.com, tells of Henry Anslinger, a government bureaucrat who in 1930 became director of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. During the Great Depression, Congress began to re-examine federal agencies, and Anslinger feared his department would become redundant. So he drafted a tax reform bill based on Hearst propaganda, which became the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. This applied a heavy tax to the sale of hemp, which benefited Hearst immensely. Together, Anslinger and Hearst crafted an anti-marijuana public relations campaign through Hearst's media outlets and backed by Anslinger's Tax Act with the goal of making the cannabis plant illegal. Because of their work and over the next 30 years, their smear campaign created a stigma through misinformation, fear, and racism that led to significant changes in public acceptance and perception. Doctors began discrediting its medical benefits. The Boggs Act was passed in 1952, creating strict mandatory punishments for offenses involving marijuana. And during the 60s and 70s, an increase in arrests were made because of the defiant counterculture, which was a basis for adding marijuana to the Controlled Substance Act of 1970, effectively making marijuana illegal. These two men were the catalyst that led to a discrediting of an entire industry. Their propaganda created a bias and a stigma that continues to this day. Their racism and greed propelled a staple in the colonization of America into being labeled as an illegal substance. But unfortunately for Anslinger and Hearst, marijuana has made a comeback through medical and legalized marijuana at the state level. Proponents of legalized marijuana say it will add billions to the economy, create hundreds of thousands of jobs, free up local resources, and help with the defunding of dangerous cartels and gangs. Alicia Wallace at thecannabis.com states marijuana industry is on track to exceed $24 billion in revenue by 2025. Last year, the industry generated $12 billion in economic activity, and dispensaries paid millions of dollars in taxes. Those taxes support important public programs. Revenues provide local funding to police programs, drug treatment and mental health centers, as well as housing and school programs as seen on drugpolicy.org. Some governments have seen 20 years of infrastructure work done in just 1 year's time, as reported by Forbes.com. Legalized marijuana is also defunding drug cartels, organized crime, and street gangs. A Washington Post article from 2016 reported that the data from the U.S. Border Patrol shows marijuana seizures have decreased by millions of pounds. And according to the ACLU, legalization is in Colorado and Washington have cost drug cartels an estimated $2.7 billion in profit. To conclude, marijuana was a celebrated crop grown by our forefathers. It has production value and was demonized by greedy businessmen and politicians who used their power and influence for personal gain, thus setting back decades of marijuana research and economic growth. And finally, criminalization has given income generated by marijuana to black markets while costing millions in taxes to fight the war on drugs. The taxes generated through full legalization could have an incredible impact on our economy, society, and the national debt. Today I discussed a history of marijuana and its criminalization, and we touched on a few of the social and economic benefits of legalization. Marijuana is a job creator. It's a social program supporter, an economic booster, and it takes money from criminals and puts it back into the hands of the American people. Do you remember the words from earlier? Does adding context diminish the power of those words? Marijuana is beneficial on multiple levels, and this cash crop has been a staple in our country from the very onset of colonization. The beneficial plant was made illegal because of selfish and nefarious motives, and the beginnings of legalization have shown the potential growth and positivity our country can gain from this titan of a plant. Thank you.